I figured today is just going to be a confessional. I'm going to tell it all.
All right, welcome back. We're in here today with legendary songwriter Mr. Don Goodman. How you doing this morning, Don?
I couldn't be better.
Well, I'm sure glad that you came and sat down with us to talk and tell us about your life and the songs you've written. Why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners what you have written?
Oh, I wrote, I guess if we take them in sequence, Feelings was my first number one on Conway and Loretta. And then I guess we went to Ring on Her Finger, Time on Her Hands. That was Lee Greenwood. Dixie Roads on Lee Greenwood. Angels Among Us on Alabama. And Ol Red, Blake Shelton.
Yeah.
Uh,
What got you into, when did you start songwriting?
I hitchhiked into Nashville in 1971.
Wow.
I'd left a factory job up in Detroit, and I had no plan B. I was either going to make it or die. Trying, there was no options.
How old were you then?
I was 26.
26. Hey, you been writing for a while at that point?
I hitchhiked into this town with about a dozen of the worst songs you ever heard in your life, and a 12-string guitar that I couldn't tune, and I was on a mission.
Well, how was it? So you hitchhiked into town. Did you have anybody here or?
I had a aunt and uncle out in Goodlettsville,
Okay.
and I caught a ride out of Chattanooga into Nashville with a Kroger truck driver, and he dropped me off at the bus station. And I was sitting in the bus station, and there was an old guy I sat down beside, and he looked at me and he looked at my guitar, and he said, "See them kids with guitars?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "They're just like you." And he said, "See them without?" I said, "Yes." He said, "They sold their guitars to get home." So I had a pretty good idea what I was getting into.
Yeah. Well, I'd say you made the best of it anyhow.
I just started knocking doors, just started knocking doors. My cousin Tommy went to school with Jack Key.
Okay.
So that was the first door I knocked on, and
Yeah.
went down to New Keys Music. They had Tom T. Hall and
Yeah.
uh, just Dave Dudley, and Jack listened to me. I was really into Bob Dylan at that time in my life. My heroes were like Bob Dylan and Hank Williams.
Right.
And Jack said, "Well, you don't sing worth a damn." He said, "But I like your lyrics." He said, "But you're not real country." I said, "Well, I'm kind of a Dylan freak." And he said, I can see that. So he said, "There's this new place opening up called Quadraphonic." He said, "You might go over there and see what you can do. They're going to do mostly pop." So I went over there and just knocked on the door, and there were three guys up on the roof, and I putting a roof on the building. I said, "Hey, anybody here? If anybody's in here?" And the guy said, he spit out a mouthful of nails. He said, "What are you here for?" I said, "Well, I'm a songwriter. I was looking for someone to listen to one of my songs." And he said, "Well, I'm Troy Seals." He said, "Give me a minute." He came down the ladder, and we went upstairs, and we wrote a song that morning. Well, let me tell you this story. It's cool. I started playing that 12-string guitar, and Troy said, "Give me that damn guitar." And I handed him the guitar, and he tuned it. I handed it back, and I started singing, and he said, "Give me that damn guitar." I handed him the song. He said, "Let me see them words." I handed him the words, and that afternoon we wrote a song called "As My Thoughts Go Back to You," and Joe Simon cut it that night.
Oh, wow.
It's my first day in town.
Wow. That's a quick turnaround, ain't it?
You talk about guided footsteps, brother. I'm living proof.
Yeah. That's crazy to see first day in town have a song cut.
The downside of that is that song never was released. But it got Troy interested in me, and they gave me a chance, and, I started going in there every day riding with Troy, and, after a while, they gave me $150 a week,
Mm.
and, 100 of it was to be the janitor, and then 50 of it was to write songs, so I called mama and said, "I'm getting 150 to write songs, mom," and, yeah, then shortly after that, Dobie Gray came to town, and, he cut the Drift Away album. I'm the guy clapping off time and on Drift Away.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
and, Troy and I just we cranked them out. We just wrote every day, and Christopherson had just finished his album there at Quad, and Donnie Fritz was coming by, and I mean, every day there was just all these stars walking in the door, and I just got to, being the janitor, I got there real early so nobody'd see me cleaning the building, and I didn't want them to know I was a janitor. But, then we wrote Feelings, Conway Twitty, and it went number 1. But the first real cut we had was, Sammy Smith. We were on the Help Me Make It Through the Night album,
Oh, yeah.
and, we got the second single, called Girl in New Orleans,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and, that then it just took off from there.
How was that whenever you did Feelings? I'm sure it was life-changing for you. Did you have to continue being a janitor after that, or did you move on up the ladder?
Well, it I figured today is just gonna be a confessional. I'm gonna tell it all.
Yeah.
Well, I was, uh Janis Joplin's producer was in town,
Uh-huh.
and he was looking for speed. Everybody was taking speed back then because it was just you had sessions were 10, 2, 6, and 10, and everybody speed was the drug of choice here in Nashville.
Yeah.
So, I was, friends with a truck driver up in Detroit whose wife had had access to speed. It was just Dexterton, you can buy it over the counter now, but it would keep you awake.
Yeah.
So I went up to Detroit, and I got 1,500 hits of speed and came back to Nashville, and I realized, well, this is how I'm gonna support myself. And, a song Troy and I had written called, Easy. Uh, David Briggs, who was one of the owners of Danner Music and Quadraphonic, he'd gone down to Memphis and he'd pitched a song to Elvis.
Mm.
And Elvis was gonna cut it, and David went down there and worked up all the arrangements on it and everything, and Troy called me and said, "We're getting an Elvis cut." Oh, man, I was so happy and excited, and, I was driving down Broadway. I ran a red light, and the cops pulled me over, and they found those 1,500 hits of speed.
Mm.
And, Troy and, David and all, Norbert, they got me an attorney, and they were gonna try and help me out because they knew when I went to get them, I went to get them for somebody else.
Yeah.
And, in the meantime, while I was waiting to go to court, I won a nightclub in a pool game, and it made the front page of the paper. It said, "Songwriter takes cue, wins game and nightclub too." Well, the lawyer was in there and his told everybody, "This is a good young man. He's got a great future ahead of him. He's a good citizen." And the judge held up that newspaper and said, "Let's see, Songwriter takes cue, wins night." They gave me 11 months and 29 days at the workhouse on the chain gang.
Paycheck special.
Oh, buddy, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was doing research for Ol Red, you know. So there you go. So after I did 30 days out there, building ditches, was lining the walls with rocks, they called me in and they said, "Have you learned your lesson?" And I said, "Oh God, have I ever? Yes, sir, I promise I'll be good." So they let me out, and, right after that is when Feelings came out on Conway and Loretta, and I had my first number 1, and Man, I've just been so blessed, you know.
Yeah, talk about going from a low to a high real quick, Al. It was high, low, high for you.
But that's welcome to the music business. And
Did y'all get the Elvis cut, or did he?
no, David called me. Elvis was in the studio over at RCA, and David was in there. They were getting ready to cut it. I got a call from David saying, "Hey, I left my briefcase at the office. Bring it over here." So I went over to RCA, and I'm walking down the hall, and here comes Elvis out the door with all his people around him. He's got his hand over his eye, and there's two blood vessels in the eyeball. One brings the blood in, the other lets it out. Well, he'd got an infection, and his eyeball was filling up with blood. It was blood red. And he went on out the door, and he never came back, and they never cut the song. But I did the research for Ol Red.
Yeah. Ol Red has become such a big song over the years. Got its own bar on Broadway now.
It's got 7 of them.
Yeah, 7 of them. That song is just it's timeless. I think I read a story, and you'd know better than me, that Hoyt Axton, didn't he kind of help get that song to Blake?
Yeah, Blake was just in town, and he'd gotten a job painting Mae Axton's house. You know,
Yeah.
Hoyt's mama, she wrote Heartbreak Hotel.
Yeah.
Okay. So Hoyt had cancer, and he had parked his bus in his mama's driveway, and he was living on the bus. And Blake was painting the house, and Hoyt played his cut of Ol Red. And Blake was up there painting, and he heard it. And he came down the ladder, and he went over and knocked on the door to the trailer, and he introduced himself, and he said, "What was that song?" And Hoyt said, "That's Ol Red. I just cut it." And uh, Blake said, "Can I hear it?" And so he went inside with Hoyt, and Hoyt played it for him. And Blake said, "If I ever get a record deal, I'm cutting that." So that's way on down the road. But you know, George Jones and Kenny Rogers had both cut it. Yeah. And Kenny had it already, did the video. He was putting it out as a single, and he was driving from L.A. to Las Vegas, and some DJ out in the middle of the desert played George's cut of it off the album, and Kenny went, "Damn, George beat me to it." So he put out Planet Texas, and Kenny wasn't all that hot at the time.
Yeah.
And if he'd put it out, it might have been a big old hit, or it might not. But boy, Blake was skyrocketing,
Yeah.
and he put it out, and just coming off Austin,
Oh yeah.
big old #1.
Yeah, those early Blake Shelton songs, Ol Red, Austin, all those, when Bobby Braddock was producing it, those was the best days, in my opinion. I love those old tunes.
Bobby Braddock called me, and he said, "That could be the best story song I've ever heard." He said, "You want to trade?" He says, "I'll trade you one of mine for Ol Red." I said, "All right, I'll take He Stopped Loving Her Today." Bobby said, "No deal."
That's a heck of a compliment, though, coming from Bobby. I love Bobby. Did you ever do much co-writing, or did you do
All my writing's been co-writing.
all of?
Yeah.
Who are some of the favorite people that you've gotten to write with over the years?
Oh gosh, Menor Williams, who wrote "Drift Away." Oh God, it just goes on and on. My favorite of them would be, of course, Marianne Kennedy and Pam Rose. And we'll get into that down the road. But Mark Sherrill, I met Mark. He was Billy Sherrill's nephew, and that gave me an open door to Billy Sherrill.
Yeah.
So. One of the first songs, though, to change the subject on you is to go back. First time I met Billy Sherrill, Rick Shulman and I had written a song called "When You're Ugly Like Me, You Just Naturally Gotta Be Cool." So I got a chance to go see Billy, and I went up there and I played him that song. And Billy listened to it and he said, "That's what I've been looking for." I mean, it was a crazy song. And he said, "Let me keep this." And sure enough, I got a phone call. He did it on George Jones and Johnny Paycheck, and they put it out as a single. I mean, the odds of that happening were about 1 in a cajillion.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it's just it's just magic. The whole damn trip's been magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Billy Sherrill, he was definitely a talent. I've talked about him a lot on these podcasts with Bobby Braddock and Gary Gentry and those who worked close with him. He was a genius by all accounts, according to those guys.
Man, if you got a song in that top left-hand drawer of his desk, it might take 2 or 3 years, but he would cut it.
Yeah.
He just had to find the artist that it fit, you know.
Yeah.
Gary Gentry and I are writing Thursday night. I write with veterans now a lot, you know, and Gary's going to come write with me and Sergeant John Taylor, U.S. Marines, this Thursday night.
Yeah, he was telling me about that. So when did you start getting into that, writing with the veterans, and what does that mean to you?
Oh, well, I keep saying this. I've just been blessed, you know.
Mhm.
This career of mine's just I've succeeded in spite of myself, you know. But about 12 years ago, I was looking for something to pay back, something to, you know, say, "Oh man, I've been real lucky, real blessed. What can I do to help
Right.
somebody?" And Bob Regan was writing songs with veterans. He came up with the idea, and he was doing out at Sergeant York Hospital in Murfreesboro, and I got talked into going over there one it was a Friday, and I went over there on Friday morning, and I sat in, and they just started talking to these veterans, and guy said, "I don't have a story," and Bob said, "Well, what'd you do this morning?" And the guy said, "Well, I went to McDonald's." Bob said, "You go every morning?" He said, "No." He says, "There's a group of us veterans meeting over there." Bob said, "Well, what'd you have for breakfast?" He said, "Well, a sausage and a biscuit."
Mm.
And that day we sat there and wrote a sausage and a biscuit with a table full of veterans. And by the time that song was over, them and me and Bob and everybody else was crying.
Mm.
And boy, I found my mission. I
That's
found
great.
what I need to do. Say thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Gary's been telling me about it for a month now, I guess. He's excited to get down there and do it with y'all, I know.
Well, he's a Navy veteran, so
Mm.
you know it touches him.
Yeah, I just think that's great what you're doing, and it's a real positive thing and helping the veterans, and I know it's probably a dream come true for some of those guys to get to write with
Man,
folks like you and Gary and
it's just all last week it was Dave Gibson, you know, ships that don't come in,
oh yeah.
and we boy, Dave's awesome. But you know, Steve Dane, myself, and a lady from Chattanooga, a businesswoman, Bobby Standifer.
Mhm.
We started Freedom Sings USA, and we built a program that isn't like all the others because ours is weekly. We've had this Wednesday class at 9 o'clock uh, for 12 years, and we've only missed maybe 3 Wednesdays in 12 years. We're there. And we've written over 500 songs with veterans. And when COVID came along, we started doing it on Zoom.
Mm.
So now we got veterans from all over the country, and we're opening up classes all over the country. And once again, you know, guided footsteps, God just said, Right, do this, and I did, you know.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome that it's spread that far and grown so big.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to see people out there helping other folks, especially our veterans who've done so much for our country. And so thank you for that, Don. We appreciate that. And hopefully it keeps going and growing and we'll get some hit songs written by some veterans. That'd
I
be
know,
awesome.
it's awesome, and, you know, all around that table, it's all veterans, you know, and a guy will go, "Well, this happened to me," and this guy over here will go, "Happened to me too, brother. I know right where you're coming from." So it's like it's veterans healing veterans with a song,
Yeah.
you know, and the song's just a part of it, but getting that off their chest and sharing it instead of living with it all by yourself, man,
Right. Right.
it is very cathartic.
Yeah. Well, you got here, you said in the early 70s. I'd imagine quite a bit has changed in this town since the early 70s, huh?
There were 3 bars on Broadway, Human's Den, Tootsie's, and, you know, and I've been working with Tootsie's forever, John Taylor down there, and my great aunt was Tootsie.
Really?
Yeah, I went down there to see her when right after I got a little something going down here, and I went in there and I said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I think we might be related." She said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Hohenwald, Tennessee." She says, "Well, we might be." And, I guess Tootsie was a singer, and she used to travel around with her band playing different places. And, I think they might have sold moonshine out of the back of the car at those. And, my uncle, Clint, was the sheriff. He had just come home from World War II, and he got elected sheriff. Well, he arrested Tootsie and her husband. So when I walked in and she says, "Well, what's your name, boy?" I said, "Goodman." She said, "Don Goodman." She said, "You Clint's boy?" I said, "No, ma'am. No, ma'am. I'm not Clint's boy." I said, "I'm Fred's boy." She said, "Boy, if you were Clint's boy, I'd throw your butt out of here. But if you're Fred's boy, I'll buy you beers." So that was my introduction to Tootsie.
What a iconic location where a lot of songwriters and artists have congregated through the years there,
Amazing.
which it's really a touristy place now. You can't hardly walk in there. It's packed like sardines, but the history of the place is incredible.
Tootsie wouldn't let the songwriters go in the back room back there, that backstage in the back,
Mhm.
because she didn't want the Opry folks to be bugged by the songwriters trying to pitch them songs.
That's funny.
We've always been kind of the lower tier. You know? They never let us up close to the stage. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I would have loved to have been able to have seen Nashville back in those days. I know I've talked to a lot of folks like you have told me the stories of how different it was, and it seems like the music industry as a whole though was a little more tight knit. Like it seemed more like everybody kind of knew everybody in town.
yeah, well, you could knock doors in those days. You know, you could knock doors and get in and play people's songs. But, you know, those days are long past, you know.
Yeah.
It's, and it's understandable because if you come in there and you play a song and, you know, then there's another song in their catalog that's remotely close to what you played them, you're liable to get sued, you know, for copyright infringement. So I understand that, but well, I sure miss being able to go up those steps over at CVS, you know, and see Billy and play him a song or oh shoot, it's just different days, man.
Yeah. Yeah. What what advice would you give to the new up and coming songwriters today?
Don't have a plan B. Do not have a plan B.
It worked out well for you, yeah.
It's come down here if you're going to do this, bet your life on it. You know, give it every single thing you got, and remember this: if you're not down here writing, somebody else is.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I got to write with Harlan Howard early in my career.
Oh, wow.
And Harlan, it don't get no better.
Yeah.
And I went in to the right and I was bitching and complaining. I was like, Harlan, man, we got this song. If we can't get it cut, there ain't no sense writing anymore. And Harlan said, let me tell you something, kid. If you can't accept the fact that 90% of everything you're going to write is going to be practice, you need to get your ass in your car and go back to Detroit and see if you get that job back. He says, because that's how, and it's the truth. I am living proof that if you write a couple thousand songs, you might get a handful right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bet your life on it and just keep on writing.
Just give it everything you got. And even if it don't happen, someday you'll be able to sit on your front porch swing and say, I gave it my best shot.
Let's go through the songs. Let's pick through them one at a time and talk about the stories behind them. I'll let you start it. Let's go in chronological order, I guess.
Yeah, that'd probably be the best way to go. I guess it was the 80s. I was Rick Sanchek, whose father was one of the creators of BMI. He left BMI and started managing people, and he was working over at Pete Drake's studio. And Rick introduced me to Marianne Kennedy and Pam Rose. They were both music majors in college, and they were there writing over at Window Music with Rose Drake and Pete Drake, and boy, we hit it off right away. Marianne and I wrote a thing for Margot Smith called "He Gives Me Diamond, You Give Me Chills," and that just got us off and running. And then I was writing at Tree at the time, and Marianne and Pam and I wrote a song called Dixie Road. No, the first one was Ring on Her Finger, Time on Her Hand. And Tom Long pitched it to Lee Greenwood.
Yeah.
And Lee just come off of Inside Out. He was hot as you can get.
Yeah.
And so Tom told me, and I didn't know who Lee was, but he played the cut of it. And when Lee hit the word fire in that second verse, but the fire inside, and that voice crackled and it sounded like fire, and I had goosebumps running up and down my arms. And the coolest thing when that came out, and it just started screaming up the charts.
Yeah.
And I got a call from Curly Putnam, and Curly wrote, He Stopped Loving Her Today with Bobby and green grass, oh God, and I don't know what all. And I get this phone call out of the blue from Curly Putnam, and he goes, Don? I said, yes, sir. He said, this is Curly Putnam. And I'm like, God, maybe he wants to write, And he says, I just wanted to call you and tell you, okay, kid, now you can call yourself a songwriter. Man, I was 12 foot tall when I hung up that phone.
Oh, I could imagine.
Jesus, Pete. And the second time, going back to Feelings, the number one on Conway and Loretta.
Yeah.
I was right near where we're sitting right now. I was coming into town to write one day, and I saw Loretta Lynn. She was going back into coal miners' music. She just pulled up and she was walking in the back door.
Yeah.
I tore into that parking lot and I jumped out of the car and I said, Loretta? She's turned around. She said, yeah. I said, I'm Don Goodman. You and Conway just cut a song of mine called Feelings. I just wanted to stop and say thank you for cutting that. It's just awesome.
Yeah.
And she said, no, thank you, Sugar, for writing it. Oh, man, you talk about feeling good.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Oh, wow. And now I'm working, I've written with her daughters and everybody else, but boy, what a magic moment that was in my life.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Here's a story. All right, here's a story. I'll jump all over the place on you.
Oh, I love it. We love the stories. That's what we're here for.
Well, I was, I gotten her after Ring on Her Finger, Time on Her Hands when, yeah, it was a big old success, and, uh, I got to write with Lee, but the magic wasn't just there when we were writing. I think I was intimidated by him.
He,
But, uh, I took a song over to, Crutchfield. He's a producer,
he,
and, he was over at MCA Records at the time, and, played it for him, and I'd cut a band, and, I was pitching it for the band to get a record deal, and, he was listening to it, and Lee Greenwood happened to be walking past his door, and, Lee stuck his head in the door and said, "What is that?" Lee Green and, Crutch said, "It's a song called Dixie Roads. Don Goodman brought it over here." And Lee said, "Play it again." Crutch played it again, and Lee said, "I'm cutting it." He says, "I'm cutting it. I want it on my album. I want it on my greatest hits album." And Crutch said, "It's all right. Your album's already in production." And he says, they're printing the labels up." And he says, "No, no." He says, "Take a song off the album." And Crutch said, "Well, what song you want to take off the album?" And Lee said, "Take off one of mine." He says, I gotta cut that song." So he cut it. Wow. And it stayed number 1 2 weeks, and it was, I think I got nominated for Song of the Year. It was that one or Ring on Her Finger. One of them was a Song of the Year
yeah.
nomination. And, I tell young writers when I'm talking to them is like, here's how fragile the music business is. All right, Lee just happened to be walking past Crutchfield's door. What would have happened if Lee had got stuck by 2 more red lights that morning?
Yeah.
He would never have heard it. There wouldn't have been a Dixie Roads, and that's just how much God plays a part in this silly game we play.
Oh yeah, I believe it. God's perfect timing, for sure. That's awesome that he was willing to take one of his own songs off of that, and he made the right choice. He did.
Whoever he wrote that song with, though, probably like to whip my ass. So,
That's all right. You and Lee got a big hit off of it anyway.
oh man, one day, staying in sequence. One day, I don't know if you heard about the Buffalo incident. That's when a little judge up in Buffalo, New York, declared that ASCAP and BMI were a monopoly,
Mm.
and all funds were frozen for a while. Like you couldn't get an advance on your royalties or anything, and a lot of the publishing companies paid our draws with advances from BMI and ASCAP. And so it just literally froze the music business. And I was out of a gig, and uh, Kent Lavoie, the guy who wrote "Me and You and a Dog Named Boo," remember that song?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
All right. Well, he started a little publishing company, and I got a deal with him, and I was living on the top floor up there, and I had this little. There was a window seat in the one window, and it looked down on 16th Avenue. And buddy, that was the loneliest place on earth. But when Rick Sanchek called me again, and he says, "I got a girl I want you to write with." And so he came. He called me up, and he said, "Her name's Becky Hobbs."
He.
And so I was sitting down on the front porch steps, just smoking a cigarette, and I was waiting for Becky to get there, and she pulled up in her little car, and she got out, and she had on skin-tight jeans, red cowboy boots, and this wild, crazy blonde hair. And I went, "Well, damn, it's the Beckaroo." And that's her name now. But she and I met that day, and we wrote a thing called Jones on the Jukebox with Mac Rickery and her and I. And we became real good buddies. And then she called me. She'd been touring with her band, and they were traveling in a van, and they were leaving the late night show, and they were uh, driving along, and something. Becky heard a voice in her head says, "Wake up, wake up." She woke up, and a truck was going to broadside them. And she screamed, and the driver swerved, and he hit the back of the bus and up to the van rather than killing everybody in it. And so Becky called me, and she says, "I've got an idea called Angels Among Us."
Wow.
And I went over there, and she played me what little bit she had of it. And Lord Almighty, there were goosebumps all over me.
Man.
And we knew when we wrote it, we knew the day we went out to County Q to do the demo, and when the band all come in the studio and say, "That's smash," thanks for letting us play on it, and sure enough, Becky pitched it to Alabama. She had met Randy, she knew Randy, and she sent him the song, and Randy was listening to it, and then he turned it off, and he just started reading the lyric out loud, that front part of it. I was walking home from school on a cold winter's day, and his little girl heard him, and she came out there and she said, "Daddy, you've got to cut that song." I can't remember the babysitter's name, but their babysitter that watched their kids for them had been pulling out Randy's driveway and was hit by a car, was killed. And his daughter said, "Daddy, you got to cut that." So when they cut it, she heard it and she said, "Daddy, no, you need to talk it like you read it." So that's why Randy recited the first part of the verse on that song.
Wow.
And that song, my son was in a car wreck, and he and two other kids from the golf team, well, they were actually four of them, two in my son's car and two in this other car, and they just got their driver's license, and they were racing and cutting each other off, and the one of the boys lost control of his car, and they were both killed. And that was my inspiration on that song because I never set foot on a golf course that I don't see Adam and guys, and they we have received I don't know how many requests. I mean, that song's been played at so many funerals and everything, but it's been in so many yearbooks from kids that were killed in automobile wrecks.
Yeah.
And no one knows that, except you and I and a few people that I've told it to.
Yeah.
But it's just like I keep saying this, it's guided footsteps. It's like ordained, this
Yeah.
your life is in those songs,
Yeah.
Like Ring on Her Finger, Time on Her Hands. I was in fanfare in the National Songwriters booth, just signing autographs and meeting people. And this lady came up through the crowd, and she finally was next up, and she stepped up, and I said, "Hi, I'm Don Goodman." She said, "Thank you, you saved my life." And I said, "Would you like to explain that?" And she said, I heard your song, Ring on Her Finger, Time on Her Hands." And she said, I I'm Church of Christ, and I was getting a divorce." And she said, "And I knew if I got this divorce, there weren't my chances to go to heaven." She says, "'Cause that's how the church feels." And she said, "Ap I had gone to the drugstore, I had bought the pills, I was driving home to take them." And she said, "I heard that song." And she said, "I knew that if you or whoever wrote that song had survived to tell that story, I could too." Yeah, I threw the pills out the window.
Wow.
And that's what prompted me to do this veteran thing I do, music is cathartic, it's healing.
Yeah.
It's what gives us all we identify with a song because it fits our life. It's part of our story.
Yeah.
You know, that's, you know, I tell young kids when I teach songwriting classes, man, if it don't make you cry, if it don't make you laugh, if it don't make you pat your foot and get goosebumps up and down your arms, you've missed it.
Yeah.
You have missed it. Because
Yeah.
if it don't move you, it damn sure ain't gonna move nobody else.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible that a song can have that impact. I've heard similar stories, and I know probably when you were writing that song, you never thought that, hey, this song might save somebody's life someday.
Oh, no, 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 no. I'd been through 2 marriages by that time. Once again, I was doing research. So, I pretty well nailed that song because 'cause I'd been through it, you know?
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's just like I keep saying, I've just been so blessed. I've been so blessed to have your dreams come true,
Yeah.
you know, and to know your talents are minuscule compared to some of these people you know, oh, and I mean, Willie and all the guys, and man, Chris, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, they write like there's no tomorrow. And, I don't know. I guess we bleed those songs.
Yeah.
You know, we breathe them, we bleed them. They're just out of our soul when we get it right.
Yeah. That story about her waking up about to be hit
Yeah.
in the vehicle, I'd never heard that before. That's the kind of stories I love.
Oh,
That's incredible. A miracle, really.
yeah, you know, God chose us to write it because we both had experienced it, you know? We
Yeah.
both had a reason, boy, I stood there that night watching them put that kid in that body bag, and I don't know if I would. And, you know, I saw a thing that night, this is off the subject, but the cop who who'd put the boy in the body bag, helped put the boy in the body bag when the dad came up, he told the dad that, no, the ambulance has already taken him. He didn't want him to see that body bag.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I've never forgot that.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine that, being a dad, losing a kid like that.
No, no.
Mm. Well, I guess we can continue on down the line to the next song.
I think, the songs now would be the military songs, you
Mhm.
know? Boy, I'll tell you what, when you get a phone call in the middle of the night and it's a veteran and he's crying
Mhm.
and he says, "Man, I had that gun in my mouth tonight. I had my finger on the trigger, but I didn't pull it. I didn't pull it. I took that CD you gave me and I listened to my song 2 or 3 times, and I just wanted to say, well, you saved me again." I mean, even if there was only one that ever did that, it would be worth it, but man, I mean, I've had a lot of those phone calls, you know?
Yeah.
When people come home with PTSD and they wake up in the middle of the night and they're back in the war and bombs are going off and, you know, I had a wife one time, I asked a veteran, I said, over at Sergeant York, VA, I said, what's your wife do when you wake up in the middle of the night screaming? And he says, well, she's out in the hall. Why don't you ask her? So I went out and got her and I brought her in and I said, you know, what do you do? What do you think when he's back in the war? And she says, I'm scared to death. I don't know what to do or say, but I've been waiting 50 years to say that. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
You know, PTSD is a family situation. It isn't just
Yeah.
the veteran. It affects the entire family.
Yeah. Well, it's just so important what you're doing for these veterans, and I know just for them to get to have that camaraderie of getting together and writing those songs. I know that's just so important for those guys.
And I guess the greatest compliment I ever got from a veteran was we wrote his song, and he came back to the class the next week, and I said, "Well, buddy, what'd you think of that song?" He said, "Well, I took that CD, and I put it in my truck. I bet I've listened to it 100 times." I said, "Well, what do you think?" He said, "I think you listened."
Wow, that's great. That is great. I'd love to one day come out and
"Oh, come on."
hang out with y'all and meet the veterans. And
"Well, Thursday night, if you wanna be there in Murfreesboro, I'll give you the address."
I'm not right out there with.
"Well, it'll be Gary Jr. and I writing with the veterans, so come on. Bring a microphone if you want."
Yeah, we'll do it. That'll be fun. I'd love to see it. I'm glad that I've Gary has mentioned to me what you're doing, but he didn't really get into the details that you've gotten into. So I'm very impressed and happy that you're doing that. So I'll definitely come out and support it in any way that I can.
Well, I'm 80 years old now, and I'm sure you've noticed today I just bounce from one decade to the next, like a pinball. But, it's just when you can sit here and just say you feel like I know exactly what Lou Gehrig meant when he says, "I feel like the luckiest man who ever lived," when he's Yankee Stadium, and, I do to have been able to not only make my living, but to be someone who's perfectly content and happy to be who I am, uh, all because of music. All because of music. God, I thank God for music, man, every day of my life.
That's fantastic. Well, Mr. Don, is there anything else you want to cover before we wrap it up?
I'm good if you are. I just hope they hadn't towed my car off from the curb.
We'll get it back if they did. Well, we appreciate you for coming in. We appreciate all the songs that you've written and helping the veterans and just being who you are, Mr. Don. We thank you, and we're so happy you came and sat down and talked.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you.